The sun dipped low over the dry hills of Merrill County, casting long, golden shadows across the dust-laced grounds of the old Langston livestock yard. What used to be the heart of a proud cattle town was now faded wood, rusted gates, and whispers of what once was. The land had grown tired, like the people who stayed behind when the jobs left. Farms had folded, barns stood hollow. And yet, on this particular evening, the old auction yard buzzed with tension, as if something wild and ancient stirred beneath the soil. Dozens of townsfolk filled the makeshift bleachers, their faces worn, skeptical, curious. Some came for the spectacle. Others came because they had nothing else left to believe in. Children clung to their parents, and old men leaned forward on their canes. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the center ring. There, standing beneath a rusted auction bell, was Victor Langston, a man with too much money and not enough patience. A former oil magnate turned real estate tycoon, Victor had returned to his hometown not to restore it, but to remake it in his image. Where fields once bloomed, he saw golf courses. Where barns had stood, he envisioned glass villas and infinity pools. But there was one thing he hadn't accounted for: the horse. Ember, they called her, a wild mare caught weeks ago in the jagged ridges of Thunder Ridge, where fog clung low and only the foolish dared ride. She had a flame-colored coat and eyes like firelight in a storm, sharp, unpredictable. Already, 3 trainers had tried to break her. 2 ended up with shattered ribs. 1 walked away with a limp he might never shake. None had lasted more than a minute in the ring. Victor raised a hand, commanding silence. "I'll make this interesting," he said, his voice steady, smooth like an expensive suit. $100,000 to anyone who can make that horse lie down for 5 full minutes. But if you fail, he let the words hang as he glanced across the crowd, "you owe me 5 grand." A murmur rippled through the audience, half shock, half temptation. That was more money than most of them saw in a year, but so was the price of failure. From the far corner, Ember stood tethered, but not tamed. Her breath was fast, ears pinned back. She pawed the dirt restlessly, body coiled like a spring. She was not broken, she was watching. And though no one moved just yet, the energy in the ring shifted. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about pride, power, maybe something older, something waiting to be understood. They called her Ember, not because of her color, though her coat burned with the deep russet of dying fire, but because of the way she moved. Restless, unpredictable, always on the edge of igniting. No one had ever really touched her, not without consequence. The stories varied, but all ended the same, with someone flat on the ground, breathless, broken, or bloody. One handler had his shoulder dislocated trying to fit her with a halter. Another suffered a cracked jaw after misjudging her kick. The third, a man with 20 years of rodeo experience, wouldn't speak of what happened. He simply packed up and left town the next morning, limping and pale. To the locals, Ember wasn't just wild, she was legend. Some said she'd never known the inside of a stable, born under storm clouds and raised by the wind itself. Caught deep in the Thunder Ridge wilderness, she was the last of a bloodline thought long vanished. Mountain mustangs bred not by man, but by the land itself. Old folks whispered around campfires that she was forest spirit in a horse's skin, a soul too old to break and too proud to bend. Standing in her makeshift pen that evening, she barely noticed the crowd. Her ears flicked at the distant murmurs, her breath steamed in the cooling air, but her focus was elsewhere. Always scanning, always waiting. There was something feral in her stillness, like a wolf who'd learned the cost of trusting. Victor Langston called her a challenge worth taming. Others called her cursed. But Ember wasn't angry. She wasn't savage. She was afraid, deeply, fiercely, not of the whip or the bit, but of what it meant to surrender. Every time someone tried to dominate her, to force her into a box she didn't fit, she responded with the only language she knew: fight. Her world had taught her that trust was weakness, and weakness meant death. No rope had held her long, no fence had stood firm, and no human had lasted more than a breath in her presence without being reminded that she did not belong to them. She did not belong to anyone. Yet behind the fire in her eyes, there was something else, a glimmer, not quite of hope, but of memory. As if, long ago, she had known kindness once. As if the ember inside her wasn't just rage, but something waiting to be reignited, not by force but by understanding. The crowd didn't see that. They saw a prize, a paycheck, a wild thing to be broken. But Ember was watching them too, and she remembered. Just as the dust began to settle and the tension in the ring started to fade into disappointment, a rustle came from the back of the crowd. Heads turned. Whispers rippled like wind through dry grass. From beyond the fence, a small figure stepped forward, slow, steady, unshaken by the hush that fell over the bleachers. She couldn't have been more than 11. Barefoot in worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt 2 sizes too big, Clara Rivers looked more like a ghost from the old days than a challenger. Her hair was a mess of tangled curls, half falling into her eyes, and slung across her shoulder was a simple cloth satchel that swung gently as she walked. In one hand, she carried something small, red, glossy, a halved apple. The crowd chuckled uneasily, half in disbelief, half in cruelty. What's she gonna do? Tell it a bedtime story? Someone muttered. A few others laughed. But Clara didn't flinch. She didn't even look at them. Her eyes, wide and dark, were fixed only on Ember. Victor Langston leaned against the rail, amused. "You sure, sweetheart?" he called out, his voice dripping with mock gentleness. "This isn't a petting zoo." Clara simply nodded. No words, just a calm certainty that made even the laughter pause for a moment. Victor smirked and waved his hand. "All right then, let the girl try." There was no fanfare, no announcement, no saddle or gear. Clara stepped beneath the ropes and into the ring with nothing but the apple and a slow, even breath. Ember's ears twitched, her hooves shifted, nervous, unsure. The air changed, a silence settled that wasn't fear, but curiosity. In the center of the ring, Clara knelt, not close, not far, and set the apple half on the ground between them. Then she sat back, her hands in her lap, eyes never leaving Ember. She didn't command. She didn't reach out. She simply waited. And for the first time all evening, so did Ember. The arena, once buzzing with murmurs and scoffs, fell into a hush so complete even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Clara sat cross-legged in the dust, her small frame barely making an imprint in the earth. The half of the apple rested a few feet in front of her, gleaming red in the fading light. She didn't shift. She didn't speak. She simply existed, calm, still, and open. Across from her, Ember stood rigid, nostrils flaring, eyes locked on the girl. Her muscles were tight, ears pinned for a moment before twitching forward, uncertain. Normally, this was when she charged, when someone dared to stand inside her space. But this girl wasn't charging. She wasn't advancing. She was just there. A few heartbeats passed, then a few more, and Ember took one step, then another. Her movements were hesitant, like walking across a frozen lake. Her eyes never left Clara, watching for the trap that surely had to come. But there was no tension in the child's body, no hint of threat, only breath, slow and measured. A rhythm Ember recognized not from memory but from something older. Instinct, maybe, or trust long forgotten. Clara didn't flinch as the mare came within reach. She didn't reach out, didn't raise her hand. She just looked, truly looked, not through the eyes of someone trying to claim or break, but someone trying to understand. That was the difference. The crowd leaned in, spellbound. This wasn't training. It wasn't domination. It was communion. A language without words, shared between two beings who'd known fear, loss, and silence far longer than they should have. Ember lowered her head. Her breath came out in a soft huff. And then, gently, almost reverently, she nosed the apple and looked back at Clara. The girl smiled, not triumphant, but tender. No victory, no conquest, just acknowledgement. And in that quiet golden moment where dust danced in the last light of day, something shifted. Not just in Ember, but in everyone watching. For the first time, they didn't see a wild animal needing to be tamed. They saw a soul waiting to be met. The seconds stretched like hours. No one spoke. No one dared. It was as if the entire arena had been placed under some invisible spell. Even the usual creaking of the old wooden stands went silent, as if the planks themselves were holding their breath. 1 minute passed. Ember stood still, just feet from Clara, ears forward, body loose. Another minute slipped by. The mare's head dipped lower. Her breathing slowed, deepened. Clara remained unmoving, her small hands folded gently in her lap, her gaze calm, unwavering. 2 minutes. 3. The only sound was the soft rustle of wind catching in the flags overhead. Then, just before the 5th minute came, something happened that no one, not even the most seasoned trainer in the county, could have predicted. Ember sighed. It was low, almost human in its release, and then she bent her knees and slowly, deliberately, lay down in the dirt beside Clara. Not in defeat, not in submission, but in peace. A stunned gasp swept through the crowd, followed by a slow rise of applause that crescendoed into thunder. People clapped with wide eyes and open mouths, unsure whether to cheer or weep. It wasn't celebration, it was reverence, as if they'd all just witnessed something sacred. Victor Langston stood at the edge of the ring, hands clenched at his sides, jaw tight. The smirk that had once played so easily on his lips was gone. In its place was something hollow, something uncertain. His gaze flicked between the girl and the horse lying quietly beside her, and for the first time, the weight of what he'd built began to shift beneath him. He didn't say a word. He just watched. Watched as the animal he'd once called a wild problem curled beside a child like a long-lost friend. Watched the people who had feared Ember now stare at her with awe. Watched the girl in dusty boots, whose name he hadn't even asked, change everything he thought he knew. And in that moment, Victor realized maybe he hadn't just lost a bet. Maybe he'd lost something far more valuable, something buried deep, that no money, no title, no ambition could ever buy back. His pride, his certainty, or perhaps a piece of his own soul. Not long after the dust had settled and Ember lay calm beside her, people began to wonder, who was this girl? Where had she come from? And how had she done what no man in 3 counties could? The answer didn't come in a press release or through proud declarations. It came quietly, like Clara herself, through stories passed between neighbors, whispered along fence posts, and finally, through the soft-spoken recollections of her grandmother. Clara lived on the edge of Black Pine Forest, in a small wooden cabin nestled between mossy oaks and overgrown trails. No television, no Wi-Fi, no glow of modern life, just creaking floorboards, old books, and the scent of firewood always lingering in the air. She was raised not by the world, but by stillness, and by a woman who understood that silence often says more than words. But Clara hadn't always been so calm. When she was just 6 years old, she had stood at the edge of a dusty training pen, watching her mother, a once celebrated horse trainer, work with a powerful, unstable stallion brought in from the north. Everyone said it was too soon. The horse wasn't ready, but the client was rich, the pressure was high, and time was short. That day, the stallion bucked hard, too hard. Clara's mother never made it to her feet again. No one ever said it outright, but Clara knew the truth. Her mother hadn't died because she wasn't good enough. She died because someone didn't listen. After that, Clara stopped talking as much, but she listened to the wind, to the birds, to the breath of animals and the twitch of their ears. She sat for hours with wounded strays in her grandmother's barn, not to train them, but to understand them. She learned that fear can't be forced into stillness, and trust never grows where control takes root. So when Clara stepped into that ring with Ember, she didn't see a threat. She saw a reflection, not of violence, but of pain, of memory, of the deep, ancient ache of being misunderstood again and again until all that's left is resistance. And instead of trying to break it, Clara did the one thing no one else thought to do. She respected it. In the days that followed, something began to shift in Merrill County, quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. The morning after the event, Victor Langston stood alone by the auction ring, staring at the spot where Clara and Ember had shared that impossible moment. His usual swagger was gone. What lingered in its place was reflection, something deeper than doubt. He didn't speak much that day, but by sundown, word had spread. Victor wasn't going to sell Ember. Instead, he did something no one expected. He walked up to Clara's grandmother's cabin with a folded deed in his hand and an offer. Ember would be hers, fully and freely, on one condition, that Clara would return to the auction yard once a week, not to perform, not to compete, but to share what she had done and why it had worked. He asked her to teach the children of the town not how to break animals, but how to see them, understand them, respect them. Clara agreed. Soon, the old auction yard began to look different. The rusted pens were cleaned and repaired. The ring was cleared of trash and painted white. And over the entrance, a new sign was carved and hung, the listening place. It became a sanctuary, not just for Ember, but for every forgotten creature within 100 miles. Dogs tied to fences, cats left behind after evictions, Injured ponies, starving goats, a blind mule named Jasper. One by one they came, and the townspeople, once only watchers, became caretakers. What had once been a place of shouts and gambling turned into a quiet refuge of kindness. Children brought carrots instead of cash. Elders brought blankets and hay. And Clara, still quiet, still barefoot most days, told her story over and over again, not with drama, but with honesty. She reminded them that strength isn't in how loud you command, but in how deeply you listen. And perhaps the most remarkable change of all was Victor himself. He kept showing up week after week, first in silence, then with feed, then with quiet help in cleaning stalls. No camera crews, no press, just a man trying to rebuild what he didn't know he'd broken. And a community finally beginning to heal. Some souls, as the story reminds us, were never meant to be broken. They were only waiting to be understood. Ember was one of those souls, and so was Clara. In a world that often moves too fast, demanding obedience, results, and control, this story asks us to pause, to listen, to sit in silence with what we do not yet understand. Clara didn't tame Ember with force. She didn't win with tricks, tools, or dominance. She offered something far more rare: presence, patience, a quiet kind of respect that comes not from fear, but from empathy. She saw not just a wild animal, but a being shaped by pain, memory, and instinct, worthy of being heard, not handled. That is the heart of this story. Because healing, true healing, often starts not with action, but with stillness. And trust, the most fragile of all bridges, can't be built in haste. It must be grown, moment by moment, in the gentle soil of understanding. This tale is not just about a girl and a horse. It's about us, about how we treat those we don't understand, about the animals we label as too wild, too broken, or not worth saving. It's about remembering that behind every set of frightened eyes, there is a story. And sometimes the kindest thing we can do is sit beside that story and wait, not for it to change, but for it to feel safe. So if this story moved you, even just a little, carry its message with you. Be gentle, be present. Love the creatures who cannot speak your language, but still speak volumes with their silence. And when you encounter a soul that resists, that runs, that fears, don't try to conquer it. Try to listen. And maybe, just maybe, you'll witness a transformation not only in them, but in yourself. If you believe in stories like this, stories that honor the quiet heroes, the voiceless animals, and the power of patient love, then don't forget to subscribe to this channel. There are many more tales to come, each one a gentle reminder of the world we share with the animals we walk beside. We'd love to hear from you. What part of Clara and Ember's journey touched you the most? Share your thoughts, reflections, or your own animal story in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your kindness might just inspire someone else to listen a little closer.